Hello, welcome to episode 160 of the Book Binge, where this week we are covering a very popular book that I had very high hopes for. I think it was an inevitability that I was slightly underwhelmed by Project Hail Mary in certain regards, just a little bit, but I did still absolutely love the book. As basically anybody who's read it can attest to the fact that this book is actually quite great in most regards, and because I still loved it, let's talk, of course, about the book itself, starting off just as normal on this channel with the good. The very first thing that I'm going to talk about that I loved about this book and that actually made me get into it after being relatively mixed in the first few chapters is the science and the problem solving that Andy Weir manages to utilize in Project Hail Mary. It is written in a very digestible but evocative manner. This is something that he's been able to do in all of his writing that I have experienced, especially in The Martian before. Project Hail Mary does the exact same thing here. The testing of limits is perfectly on show in this book as well. Just one of the things that Andy Weir does so well, besides writing the science, is being able to write science in this kind of material, the problem-solving aspect, and like testing the limits of what he can and can't do that is believable. There's some stuff here that should by no means be believable, but he manages to write to be believable anyway. That is just super great. The problem solving, especially in the last act, builds a lot of tension. Tension building with the sciencey aspects of the book is not something you would expect to be something that is so easy to do, but Andy Weir definitely makes it look easy to do, and this book exemplifies that quite brilliantly. And Project Hail Mary also allows for fun and sensible and brilliant decision making, generally speaking, whereas, a lot of other authors trying to make a book of this style using science and problem solving and whatnot might, cut a few corners and have some things that either feel a little bit too much like Deus Ex Machina or things that don't feel fully fleshed out well enough. Andy Weir balances it all terrifically. But I did mention tension a little bit earlier. I want to talk about the setting and the tension of Project Hail Mary. The way that Weir uses the galaxy in this book, incredible, genuinely incredible. I was super invested in the setting of the main story of the book. Very, very, very well. The way both the galaxy and the, spoiler alert, you realize this in the very first chapter of the book, the amnesia plot develop, the stakes is super good because of the way that these kind of bounce off each other. The intensely large and also minutely small scope are brilliant for contrast. This might not make a whole lot of sense, but based off of where Ryland as the main character is actually set through the majority of the book versus the way that Weir utilizes the galaxy as a broad setting, these two contrast each other perfectly. And it may not make a whole lot of sense just me saying it right now, but if you read the book or if you have read the book, yeah, you will probably totally understand what I'm saying here. Also, the way that Ryland's small ship is so big, where it's actually so small, makes for effective kind of mood swings throughout the book. In multiple different points, you kind of feel what Ryland is feeling because of the way that the ship is his entire life in certain regards at various points of the story. Whereas he also considers wow, this is I'm in this crazy situation that is so big and so large. It's done quite well. The other thing that I want to talk about that is so good about Project Hail Mary is actually minorly spoilery. Well, it is majorly spoilery, I guess. I knew about it going in, but plenty of readers aren't aware about it going in, so if you do not want to know what this is, well, you're going to have to skip to the next section in the bad to miss it. If you've skipped now, good, because I'm about to get into the part that is the biggest spoiler about the story, essentially. It's not just the story of saving humanity on Ryland's part. Project Hail Mary is the story of a relationship. It is a first contact story, and the relationship between Ryland, the main character, and Rocky, this alien, is entertaining, funny, and emotional all at the same time. The way it opens up and also closes the scope of the science and the galaxy is perfect. It makes everything feel so small and limited and condensed, while also making you realize just how big it is at the same time. Again, this is one of those things that Weir does super well in this book, and this relationship leads to a super emotional ending that isn't actually the ending. There were multiple points where I thought this is the end of this relationship, and oh wow, it's actually not. That's really cool. Then the real ending is also a great change from The Martians. After most of the book is very familiar to The Martian, it is nice that this book does something different and is able to do so on account of this relationship is great. As for the bad, there were a few things that I will say I had a little bit of a problem with in Project Hail Mary that I didn't actually think was going to be a problem. I would say the prose was occasionally a little bit of a problem for me, even though Weir is able to write science and everything like that super, super well. There are occasional spurts of his characters monologuing that just comes off as bad. This is most especially apparent in the PG cursing. Generally cringe. This was not a good decision on Weir's part. Following The Martian, where there's so much like legitimate and strong cursing throughout, going to like a middle schooler's version of cursing, just replacing bad words with different words that like don't feel as effective, comes off very, very strange in this book, and is discounted by the fact that there are a few points where legit strong cursing is used now and again in Project Hail Mary, which, yeah, it discounts the fact that most of the rest of the book doesn't utilize it. It feels very off to me at times. It's kind of a weird complaint to have, but yeah, it is very weird. And on that note, Ryland himself as a narrator is somewhat messy compared to, say, Mark Watney from The Martian. Ryland is a culmination of the two previous points. He is no Mark Watney. Project Hail Mary is, in my opinion, too similar to The Martian in a lot of ways for Ryland to be a notably weaker main character. I mean, if he was the exact same main character, you could, point issues to that and be like, oh, well, Andy doesn't actually know how to write a narrator other than Mark Watney. That's good. But, like, at the same time, I would prefer a Mark Watney clone in Project Hail Mary than Ryland, because Ryland was somewhat disinteresting and kind of annoying at certain times because of this PG cursing and his monologuing being a lot less evocative, I would say, than Mark's was. And another point where, kind of Ryland is concerned, the amnesia plot development has a little bit of a weird thing going on. I would say the amnesia plotline starts off really great, going back and forth between real time and the past, Ryland remembering stuff, getting insight into that past and the character work. It works really well, but then there's a point in the story where Weir just stops doing it for some reason. Like, he still goes back in time, Ryland still goes back in time and experiences these past memories, but like through the early portions of the book, he acknowledges these memories. These memories affect him. He has brief little spurts of memory about his crewmates who he, wakes up against, and like has tears in his eyes, is emotionally affected. And then like there's a point in the story where he just stops being emotionally affected. He stops acknowledging in the current day narration about those flashbacks. Those flashbacks just become a means to an end to explain how or why Ryland has something on the ship or knows something. It eventually just stops acknowledging the emotional aspect of that, and for some reason, there is no reason for it. I just don't get why this stops. It was one of the weirdest aspects of the book. So like these two things, their narration occasionally being clunky on account of Ryland just, having a too similar but also too different narration style and speech style to Mark Watney, that is weird. And then the amnesia plotline does have this objective problem, in my opinion, of just not being acknowledged properly through the entire second half of the book. It is really, really strange. Moving on to the ugly, I would say that all of this stuff that I just talked about in the bad kind of culminates in the audience, the intended audience for Project Hail Mary, not being super clear. The science is pretty high-end, and plenty of the concepts are pretty tough to grasp in ways that none of the science in, say, The Martian was. So, there's aspects to this that's just like, would this be readable by a teenager in high school? Maybe, but it depends on the reader. There are plenty of high schoolers who, would not be able to read this book. But then the prose for part of it, because of the lack of cursing for the most part, makes it seem like Andy's trying to market this book towards middle schoolers or something like that, whereas The Martian was obviously not marketed towards a young audience. To be fair, Andy wasn't actually trying to write The Martian for any audience at all. He was just writing it because he could. This book feels like it was being marketed towards a younger audience, despite plenty of the concepts being relatively high end or things that might only be appreciated by people who are a little bit older than, say, middle school. So, like, it's really weird. The PG cursing just really, really bothers me. That narration style really bothers me in certain aspects because of this reason. Like I said, it is kind of a weird complaint to have, but it does really affect my personal experience. It's the reason why I think Project Hail Mary is notably weaker than The Martian, where I have read The Martian multiple times and still think it's a perfect book. Will be rereading it, sooner than later, and think it will probably still hold up at that point. This one, I don't understand why people would say it is better than The Martian. I understand why people love this book. I really enjoyed it too, and that aspect that is a little bit spoilery that I talked about in the good is the reason why this book is so stand out, and I guess the reason why I could see people ranking this over The Martian, but like, The Martian is overall a lot more smooth of a story than this one is. I think this one has a few hiccups now and again that The Martian just didn't have. On that note, let's actually talk about the recommendation. Read this for the spoilery thing that I can't really talk about. That alone should be the reason why people read it. Like, that's it. Read this book. I do recommend Project Hail Mary. Seriously, that aspect is so good, and Weir's science, core concept, the way he utilizes the galaxy, all of this other stuff really strengthens that aspect, and all of it just coalesces in something that is really special. Though there are minor issues, and I had certain issues with certain aspects of it that I guess other people largely haven't, it is genuinely very good and worth reading. I still prefer The Martian, and it's not particularly close in my personal mind, but it is a book worth reading nonetheless. With that being said, that is the end of my review for Project Hail Mary. I'm probably going to get a couple dislikes because I dared to criticize this book at all. That's okay. I hope you enjoyed this book. I hope you do enjoy it if you are one of the very few people who hasn't read it already, like I was when I read it just a few months ago. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of your face now. I will be doing another top 5 list this Thursday. That will be top 5 westerns I want to read, so something a little bit different as well, despite being a ranking, which I've come to do plenty of this year. I'm excited for that review, or that list, and then I'll have a review of Outer Dark next Tuesday. I will go ahead and get out of your face now for real. Thank you for watching. I'll be back in the next video.